Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, where we will be talking about our Underpensioned Index 2022. My name is Samantha Gould, and I'm Head of Campaigns and PR within Now Pensions. And just before I go to our amazing panel, I would love to open with a brand new video that we have created to coincide with our 2022 report.
This goes out to all the single mums and dads, the ones who are suffering, and the people who care for them. We're talking to the freelancers and the multi-jobbers, the not 9-to-5ers, the people who walk their own path, and all those who don't fit the norm, and who are all the better for it. We understand how you live, love, and work. We salute you, and our mission is to ensure that your future years are something you look forward to. We know pensions are the last thing on your mind. And we understand that it's hard to think about tomorrow when your head is full of how you deal with today. So that's why we are here, to support the underpensioned and help you to think about your future and feel positive about where you are going. Let's take that journey together, because your life is worth celebrating.
I'm now going to introduce all of our panel. Well, actually, I'm not. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they will do a far better job. And I'm going to start with Joanne, as you are my top left. So, Joanne, please, can you introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Sam, and delighted to be here. My name is Joanne Segars. I'm the chair of the Now Pension trustee for Now Pensions. And I've been in pensions for a very, very long time. And throughout all of that time, I've been campaigning for a fairer deal for pensions, especially a fairer deal for women. We've come a long way, but we've got an awful lot further to go.
Thank you. Stefan Lundberg.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Sam. My name is Stefan Lundberg, and I'm Director of Cardano Insights. I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to improve pensions, make it easier for people to understand, and also think about how can you improve policy in different countries. My focus areas are mainly Netherlands, UK and Sweden. So it's good to kind of share and mix from the different opportunities.
Thank you, Stefan. Lauren, I can come to you next.
Thanks, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Wilkinson, and I'm a Senior Policy Researcher at the Pensions Policy Institute. A big focus of my work is on the underpensioned. We've been working together with Now Pensions for 3 years now on the Underpensioned Index, and I've been the lead author on the 3 reports that we've released so far.
Thank you, Lauren. And Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. I'm Mark Smith. I head up media relations for the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, which means it's my responsibility to communicate our pensions work to the outside world. And this afternoon, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about our retirement living standards, which have just been updated last week.
Thank you, Mark. And what I'd like to do is start with delving into some of these stats that we released back in December 2022, which is looking at the underpensioned groups. So before I hand over to Lauren, just to explain that at Now Pensions, we've been campaigning for the underpensioned since 2019. And we have identified 8 groups in the UK who we class as underpensioned. And that includes women, divorced women, single mothers, multiple job holders, self-employed, people with disabilities, ethnic minority groups, and one other group. I had total blank, but Lauren is going to cover all of them in a few seconds. But I think one of the main findings that we found is since our first report in 2020, which is obviously the height of the pandemic, which none of us were really expecting, actually the retirement outcomes for our groups has not improved. I think, again, it's just a continuation of the economic effects from the 2020 pandemic. And obviously 2022 has seen a huge cost of living crisis, which I know, Mark, you're going to talk about a lot in your session a little later on. But I'm now going to hand over to Lauren just to explain some of the key differences from our 2020 and our 2022 index.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, so just to go through the underpensioned groups that we look at, I didn't catch which one you missed there, so I'll go through them all. Apologies for repetition. So we've looked at women, in particular, divorced women and single mothers. We've looked at people from ethnic minority backgrounds, people with disabilities, people with caring responsibilities, and people in non-traditional employment like self-employment and multiple job holders. So looking at how things have changed since the 2020 report that we did 2 years ago, So as Sam said, the last couple of years have been particularly turbulent, as we all know. So the data in the 2022 report really needs to be viewed through that lens. So as I go through the findings and the differences compared to 2020, I'll flag up where we think changes might be a product of the current economic climate, rather than long-term trends that we might be seeing when things start to hopefully stabilise soon. So if I start off with the core Underpensioned Index itself, this compares the current pension incomes of underpensioned groups to the average for the broader population. So private pension incomes of underpensioned groups have remained low, so below 3/4 of the average for the population in terms of private pension incomes. So some groups have also experienced quite significant declines compared to those 2020 figures that we had on the original index. So there are some groups that have remained relatively stable. Those are single mothers, carers, and divorced women. And those private pension incomes have remained at a similar rate since the 2020 index. But for other groups, they've experienced significant declines comparative to the population average. So private pension incomes of people from ethnic minority backgrounds have decreased almost 10% compared to the population average. Now, it's important to note there that that doesn't mean that their real numerical incomes have declined by 10%. What it does mean is that their comparative incomes compared to that population average have declined. So they're experiencing poorer later life outcomes compared to the population average around them. We've also seen the incomes of people with disabilities declining by around 8% over that 2-year period. So they're now at just over a third of the population average, quite a significant gap there. When we take income from state pension and benefits into account, the underpension gap is much smaller, but still significant. So comparative incomes there range from around 78% to 94%. So we're talking about quite significant inequalities experienced by our underpensioned groups. So if we could look now at the factors that contribute to the risk of being underpensioned, these are particularly focused around the labour market and the experiences that underpensioned groups have during working life. So although we've seen employment rates increasing, underpensioned groups continue to have much lower rates of employment and higher rates of part-time employment compared to the population average, and also lower incomes when they are in work. So these labour market inequalities during working life contribute significantly to the lower standards of living that our underpensioned groups experience when they're in retirement. We see that many underpensioned groups' employment rates have increased since the 2020 index, but these changes have broadly followed the same trend for the population as a whole. So across the population, employment rates have increased, suggesting that this growth is related to broader changes in the economic landscape, rather than any substantial progress that's been made on improving underpensioned labour market experiences in particular. And it's also worth noting, looking at the current cost of living crisis, that in many cases, it's likely that these employment rates have increased partially out of necessity to meet the challenges of the current increases in terms of cost of living, rather than because of improved labour market attachment for other reasons. So should be viewed within that perspective. So underpensioned groups as a whole have broadly followed this trend for increased employment rates, but the extent to which we've seen increases has varied across the different groups. So women's employment rates have increased by around 2%, while men's have increased at a similar rate. So that's maintaining a gap of about 9% between the two in terms of overall employment rates. And back when we created the 2020 index, some ethnic minority groups had employment rates that were around the population average. But what we've seen since is that now all have lower than average employment rates. So we've seen quite significant declines there, and they're not following that trend of increased employment rates. So I think further research is probably needed to understand why they're not following that trend and how they can be supported to keep up with the population trends. The employment rates that we've seen for people with a disability have also increased broadly in line with the increases that we've seen across the population. And also rates of full-time work for people with disabilities have increased more substantially even. Similarly, employment rates for people with caring responsibilities have seen the most dramatic change since the 2020 index. So they've actually increased by around 20%. And their rates of full-time work have also increased, but to a lesser degree. So across those groups, apart from people from ethnic and minority backgrounds, we have seen increases in employment rates there, which should be viewed as kind of tentatively positive, although in line with broader population trends. As well as kind of lower levels of labour market participation, as I said, underpensioned groups have lower than average incomes. So the gap between women's average incomes and the population average has increased quite a bit since the 2020 index, from 12% to 20%. And if we look at ethnic minority groups, again, there's quite a bit of variation between different groups. So some groups have average incomes that have declined substantially, and others have effectively stagnated since the 2020 index. We've not been seeing much growth there. Average incomes of people with disability or caring responsibilities have grown, but they do still remain substantially lower than the average, so 19% and 10% lower respectively. As well as those kind of labour market inequalities, people in underpensioned groups face specific inequalities that are related to pension provision and entitlement. So automatic enrolment has, of course, been a great success in bringing more into pension saving, and that's been the case for underpensioned groups as well. Many more in pension saving now than previously, but they remain disproportionately ineligible. So they're less likely to meet the automatic enrolment qualifying criteria compared to the population average. And what we have seen since the 2020 index is that the gap has narrowed for most groups, as their eligibility has been increasing, but some have not been impacted quite so positively. So women's eligibility for automatic enrolment is increased by around 6%, and that's really narrowed the gap between women's and men's eligibility, as men's has been growing at a lower rate. But for people from ethnic minority backgrounds, again, the evidence is a little bit less positive. So some of them have eligibility around the population average, and if you take them as one homogenous group, then they have the same level of eligibility. When we start to look into more specific ethnic groups, there are some that have much lower levels of eligibility. Similarly, people with a disability and carers much less likely to be eligible, and also because of the much lower levels of employment, that means that there's much lower pension participation overall as well. So there are those who are outside the labour market, and those who are within it are less likely to be being automatically enrolled. So I think it's really important that we recognise that the current economic climate could exacerbate the underpensioned gap and make it more challenging to implement the policies that might narrow the gap in the short term. But it's really important that we approach this challenge with a long-term view. So some of the potential policy levers that we might talk about that could be introduced in relation to this challenge might not be appropriate to be actioned right now. We recognise that individuals, employers and government are facing significant financial difficulty. But I think it's also important that we're mindful that the inequalities that we've already recognised in relation to underpensioned groups are likely to increase during this period. So it's more important than ever that we're making plans for the longer term for improving inequalities over the longer term. And even if they might not be actioned until the economy is stabilised, it's really important that we're kind of putting those plans in place. So it's great to be here with you all this afternoon to discuss that and to understand how we can better support underpensioned groups and also just improve retirement outcomes across the whole of society.
Thank you, Lauren. And then just one point I wanted to pick up as well is that you said that some of our groups have remained stable compared to our 2020 index, but obviously not discounting the fact that these groups are reaching retirement age with around 15% of the private pension wealth compared to the UK average. So in our press release that we did in December, it showed that some groups are reaching retirement with less than £3,000 saved in their private pension. And, when we talk about retirement age or being in retirement for a 20-year period, obviously there's going to be over-reliance on the state pension, which I know there's some silver linings in terms of triple lock. But just going into the policy side of it, I'd like to bring Joanne in, if I can, because this is something that we at Now Pensions have been lobbying on behalf of and campaigning for many years. And Joanne, could you just highlight some of the big policy levers that you think we could put pressure on in terms of helping the underpensioned groups?
One way we can tackle this, and I should apologise, I'm going to try and get through this without coughing too much. But I think one way we can really tackle some of these issues and tackle some of the underpensioned group, address some of the underpensioned issues that Lauren's identified so much, is to really help people get into automatic enrolment. As Lauren said, automatic enrolment's been a huge success story. It's brought millions of people into pension saving, many of them for the first time, but many people, millions of people in these underpensioned groups are simply locked out of automatic enrolment. So I think one of the things we could do there is tackle some of these eligibility criteria, which is that Lauren talked about, which is locking people out of automatic enrolment. So a few thoughts from us from Now Pensions that we've been lobbying on over the years, and where I think there's a big sort of head of steam now building up. The first would be to remove the £10,000 eligibility criteria. So to get into automatic enrolment in the first place, you've got to be earning £10,000 or more. And that means an awful lot of people simply don't earn that much, either from their single job, or they might have a couple of part-time jobs, which together might add up to £10,000, but individually don't. So they can't get into this great automatic enrolment machine. So removing that £10,000 trigger will bring millions of people, almost 2.5 million people almost, into automatic enrolment. And many of those people would be women. The vast majority of them, in fact, would be women. So that's policy idea number one. Second policy idea is to have pension contributions start from the first pound of earnings. Currently, around about the first £6,500 of earnings are disregarded for automatic enrolment contribution purposes. And that means that for a lot of people, particularly people in these underpensioned groups, as Lauren said, many of them are in lower income groups, a lot of their income simply doesn't count towards pensions. They simply don't get pension contributions on that. And we know that the more you put away, the bigger your pension is going to be at retirement. So making sure that automatic enrolment counts in the first pound of earnings, you get contributions that you make, but your employer will make, and you'll get tax relief on from the first pound of earnings, is going to make a real big difference. And over time, many, many years, over the many decades we're going to be in the labour market now, that's going to build up again to make a real difference. Could, increase people's pensions by many, many percent. The third idea will be to start automatic enrolment from the age of 18. At the moment, you have to be 22 or more, to get into automatic enrolment. But starting, we know that the earlier you save, the more you can put away, the more you'll have when you retire. So starting from age 18 will be a big start. We recognise the reality of life. We recognise the reality of the current economic condition and the cost of living crisis. So we recognise that we can't start those policy changes now. But what we do need is to develop a roadmap that's going to set out how we, pensions industry, employers, members, government, are going to get there.
Some of those policy proposals that you've highlighted there in the report that we've done with the PPI, we've shown that there's currently 8.6 million people that are locked out of auto enrolment, and by removing the £10,000 starting contributions from the first pound of earnings, we could get 3 million more women saving into a workplace pension, and also that would increase annual pension contributions by over £1 billion a year. So obviously there are huge differences that we could make to people's lives in terms of their retirement. But I'm now going to go over to Mark to talk about the PLSA, who are celebrating their 100th birthday today. They have released a new set of retirement living standards, which I will ask Mark to, one, explain what he means by retirement living standards, but also the increase in retirement savings that they have now realised that people need to be saving. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Joanne. Those policy proposals, there's an enormous alignment with the Pensions Lifetime Savings Association's own proposals. In fact, quite a huge amount of consensus across the industry as well about those measures. So perhaps we'll get onto those in a bit more detail later on. Now, in the context of underpensioned groups, the retirement living standards are all about working out how much money people actually need to fund their lifestyle in retirement. So hopefully this will be quite familiar with most of the people in this audience, but as a reminder for those who have perhaps not encountered them before, they're based on independent research by the Centre for Research in Social Policy at Loughborough University. That's the same group behind the Joseph Rowntree Minimum Income Standard. And the retirement living standards essentially describe the cost of 3 different baskets of goods and services. And these are based on what the public considers to be realistic and relevant expectations for retirement living. So importantly, at the minimum level, this isn't just about surviving. It's about having a little bit of money for some cultural participation and to do things that sort of really contribute towards people's well-being and dignity in retirement. These standards are regularly reviewed at different levels to ensure they keep up with changes in the public's expectations of what retired households need, as well as the changes to prices actually on the shelves so that they remain relevant to real-world spending. Now, we've updated the retirement standards before in line with inflation 2 years ago, and as you can imagine, it wasn't a particularly big story. Now, the cost of living crisis and the high inflation we've seen this year has meant that the financial services and personal finance press have been particularly interested in the changes that we've made to the standards this year. So the headline is that the cost of a minimum lifestyle has increased from £10,900 a year to £12,800 a year. That's 18% for a single person. And it's actually up from £16,700 to almost £20,000 a year for a couple. That's a 19% increase. So really big increase for that minimum retirement living standard. As I say, that at that level, it includes £96 a month for, £96 for a weekly food shop. It also includes a week's holiday in the UK in that annual spending. In the budget is also some room for eating out about once a month, and some affordable leisure activities about twice a week. So it might be, a five-a-side football team or whatever hobbies people might have in retirement, so they can keep that cultural participation. At that minimum level, it doesn't include the budget to run a car. Now, we know when our pension schemes talk to their members about this can be quite confronting, especially if people live in rural areas, thinking about their retirement years when they'll be catching the bus and train to get about. So this can be quite confronting. Rising food and fuel prices have contributed significantly to the increases in that minimum standard. The update also saw the amount of food included within the budget increasing, and this is sort of in line with the advice from nutritional experts that feed in to the research there. Now, it's a disproportionate increase from the minimum standard. The moderate and comfortable levels haven't gone up as much. This is because more of people's, a bit higher proportion of people's spending at the minimum level goes on food and fuel, the things which have risen the most. It also means that the commitment that the government made to its triple lock in the most recent autumn statement for the state pension is especially important. Now, the state pension rose just over 10% to £10,600 per year. So this means that if you're in a couple and you are both in receipt of a full state pension, then you will reach the minimum retirement living standard. And for many people, it's quite achievable also in a single, if you're a single person household, because you don't really need a huge amount of retirement savings to reach the minimum level. But of course, for underpensioned groups, the reality of that can be much starker. The moderate levels and the comfortable levels, I won't delve into them too much, just because of the context of which we're talking about underpensioned groups here, but they've gone up a little bit as well. The moderate's increased about 12%, and the comfortable's gone up about 11%. As you can imagine, these levels include, slightly expanded lifestyles, perhaps, more trips abroad, a trip to Europe for a holiday. And, the comfortable level, then you might even be able to sort of replace your kitchen or a bathroom from time to time on that budget. But the comfortable level really is, in my view, quite luxurious. So most people, I think, will be focusing on somewhere between the minimum and the moderate. So that's the retirement living standards in a nutshell, and hopefully you would have seen bits and pieces of that in the media over the past week. Happy to take any questions about it.
Thank you, Mark. So I think, what we've established in the latest set of retirement living standards is that actually the biggest impact will be for people who are trying to achieve, the minimum level of living, which obviously largely would be people within the underpensioned category. But thank you for taking us through that. And I know you did a big launch last week. Stefan, I'd like to come to you now. So a lot of the time I get asked the question, why are people underpensioned, and is it to do with lack of engagement? So obviously auto enrollment was started 10 years ago, so 2012, and the whole kind of concept is built on inertia, and that is as soon as people hit age 22 and they're earning over £10,000 in a single role, they will be accessing a workplace pension without even realizing that there's nothing they have to do. The employer enrolls them and it comes straight out of their pay packet, which sounds great. But, as we said, 100 years of PLSA, and we still, have a problem with people not saving enough for their later life. So just looking at the kind of work that you've been doing around kind of examples we can take from around the world or, other types of pension setups, do you think we have a particular problem with pension engagement in the UK?
That's an interesting question. And when I'm looking back at what actually both Lauren and Mark have been talking about, it's a lot of the challenge. It's not really a pension problem, it's a labor market problem. And I think a lot of the effects politics can do is to make the labor market work better, particularly for those who are underpensioned. And the more people get into a more traditional labor market, and the more they contribute, because if you're self-employed, it might be not so easy to contribute to pension. My thought, I think the great thing with auto enrollment, if you look at the people who are in the savings phase, is that you as you said, you don't have to think about it just happen. It's payroll deductions. You don't see the money disappearing from your payslip. And I think one of the most important parts there is the sort of creating the habit of saving. And actually, if you opt out, you might need the money and you feel, I don't want to opt out. The question is, how are you going to opt in again when times are better? So sometimes it might actually be good if you can afford it to stay in contributing to pension, because then you will continue on and on until retirement. Because the most important part is not to make large career breaks. And I think for other groups like women with children, I think taking care of health, childcare in a much more efficient way is also a way to make it easier for people to go back to work. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done and probably need to be done because we are an aging society. So we need to sort of make sure that it's actually easy to raise a family as a couple or as a single mom, because the children are the future. What I was a bit shocked about when I saw the PLSA report is that if you're underpensioned, basically you have to spend 20% more money to get your basket of goods. Then, of course, we do have state pension, which has gone up with 10%, but that means in terms of what you can buy, you're 10% short. And this, to me, is a big sort of challenge for people who are in retirement. If you're still working, you can say, well, maybe energy prices will go down and become a smaller part of my consumption basket in the future. You don't really know, because this might be very extreme times, and will be better times coming on. And if you retire, then when the situation is better, you might not feel it. But if you are retiring now, then you do have a real problem. And what I like with auto-enrollment could probably be applied somewhere else as well. So we do have something called pension credits. So as an individual, if you're listening now, if you're in retirement, go and get your pension credits, apply for it, because it can help you a lot. It's money you deserve. You have the right to them. You just have to apply. The challenge with that is you have to take an effort to do it. And you probably have to fill in a very lengthy, horrible questionnaire. And for a lot of people, it's a bit of stigma. You don't really want to do it. So why make it so difficult to get the pension credits, which is something is there for the people who really need it? And so my thought there, if you would apply the whole idea of auto-enrollment and the nudge, you could probably change the process there. So if you want to have, instead of sort of having to apply for pension credits, we should be able to, the Treasury probably know the amount of who would be allowed to get this or not. So those who are clear cases should actually just get the money paid out. And when you have the border cases where you say might be eligible or might not, you can ask them for a very simple, can you clarify this information? Then we will know if you have the right to it or not. I think that would actually be a very, very good way of just changing the framing of something that's already there, already existing, so that people who are entitled to it also get access to it in a very simple way. So that would be my thoughts around it. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Stefan. And I'd like to bring in Joanne and Lauren, because I know we spoke a little bit about this yesterday. But I know, Joanne, you've been through a process where you are attempting to claim for some, state benefits on behalf of a family member, and in no ways is it simple or straightforward. So
yeah, and I mean, I think it's just really thinking about the other benefits to which people are entitled. So attendance allowance is one. It's about £60 a week or so, which an awful lot of people are entitled to. So entitled if they are looking after somebody who needs support. So the benefit actually goes to the person who needs the support, but helps with that process. It's not a simple process. The form is 30 odd pages long, but actually the benefit at the end of the day is really worth it. So I think it is worth people thinking about and finding out about other benefits to which they might be entitled. Now, so people who are currently in retirement or over state pension age, attendance allowance actually isn't means tested. But thinking about those other benefits is really important. And while I've still got my voice, Sam, before I start having another coughing fit, I just want to go back to something else that Stefan talked about, which I meant to bring up earlier, but my cough got the better of me. And when we think about these policy changes, and I think Lauren hinted at this, Stefan's hinted at this, we tend to focus on the changes within the pension sphere, and that's what we've been focusing on here. But actually, an awful lot of the changes sit outside the pension sphere. So, one of the things that's really shocked me as we've gone through this whole process, and we've been lobbying government and talking about the underpensioned groups, is the cost of childcare in this country, which is, the average cost of childcare is about £1,000 a month. It's more than the average mortgage, or at least was before interest rates went up. And so if we want to get more people into the labour market, if we want to help people back into the labour market after they've taken time out to have their family, then addressing the childcare issues and the costs of childcare and the availability of childcare is one other thing we need to do. So we need to think about this issue of the underpension, not just as a pensions issue, but across the piece more generally.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And childcare is a big stickler of mine, as I'm sure a lot of people know. But yeah, there's around 54,000 mums who leave the workforce every year, and that's according to research by charity Pregnant and Screwed. So when we look at, labour market issues, if we're losing a high percentage of our potential workforce, and then, linking that back to our underpension report, which is that women are reaching retirement with around a third of pension wealth as men. So our report in March this year that we did with PPI showed that a girl would have to start working and saving from age 4 in order to have the same amount of money in retirement as a man. So again, it's, as Joanne said, it's not necessarily within the pension sphere. There's broader issues that we would need to tackle as well. But sticking on the state pension or kind of any kind of pension credits or benefits, I know, Lauren, that's always been a big feature within our report. So in terms of our underpensioned population, they tend to be supplemented by, state benefits. But that doesn't mean that necessarily they're getting what they should be getting, and they're not claiming everything that they could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stefan mentioned it, that there can be a stigma attached to accessing means-tested benefits. And so what we are seeing is that some people on very low incomes in retirement in our underpensioned groups are not accessing all of the state support that they could. So they're experiencing poor later life outcomes when actually there's support available, but they have attitudes, particularly in that older generation, and particularly in some underpensioned groups where there might be cultural differences and attitudes towards accessing means-tested benefits that can discourage them. So maybe switching to a more automatic system, or a campaign around people's entitlement to pension credit and making it seem less stigmatized would really help there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, as Stefan said, if the revenue already has the info in terms of what we get in terms of income and what would be owed to us, kind of automating that system to remove any stigma and ensuring funds are diverted where they're needed could be a potential remedy solution for our underpension groups. But sticking on policy, and I know that Mark, that PLSA have also got numerous policies around kind of improving retirement outcomes. But just starting with Lauren, what is the biggest policy lever that we could pull in terms of helping the 8.6 million underpension groups?
Yeah, so there are a number of pension-specific changes that could be made to potentially bring more in underpension groups into pension saving. But Joanne's talked through those, particularly focusing around changes to automatic enrolment eligibility criteria. But as Joanne's also mentioned, it's really important that we look at this not just from a purely pensions perspective. We look at this holistically and we understand how other policy areas are actually impacting retirement outcomes. So, as we've talked about quite a bit, the economic challenges that we're seeing at the moment mean that it's maybe not the right time to be asking most people in our underpension groups to be diverting more of their money away from present needs. We've mentioned that many in underpension groups are on lower incomes, either on an individual or household basis, and they're also spending more of their incomes on essential day-to-day needs. So the current cost of living crisis is likely to be having a more severe negative impact on them. So what that means is that there should be more of a focus on making sure that they're adequately supported through this challenging time, rather than asking more of them in terms of saving. So hopefully if they're supported more, that will kind of minimise the impact it could have in the longer term on their retirement outcomes. So as I said, this means looking further than purely pension solutions. So things like making sure that the benefit system adequately supports low-income individuals and households so that they're not accruing debt or depleting any non-pension savings that they have in order to meet those essential day-to-day needs. And this is really important for underpensioned groups in the short term. If they're accruing lots of debt or kind of depleting those savings, then that will have a knock-on impact on their later life outcomes over the longer term. And looking also then kind of at the longer term, it's important that we're looking to tackle those kind of underlying factors that are outside the pension space that are contributing to the risk of being underpensioned. So particularly in the labour market, anything that can be done to support kind of stronger labour market engagement and outcomes for underpensioned groups is likely to have that knock-on impact in improving retirement outcomes. So things like greater accessibility to flexible and remote working can be really beneficial for some of our underpensioned groups, particularly mothers, carers, people with a disability. And this is an area where we've seen quite a significant shift over the last couple of years, although we'll probably want to monitor to make sure that it's not having any kind of unexpected negative consequences in terms of career progression and things like that. But also things like broader societal shifts in terms of kind of attitudes around things like shared parental leave and gendered divisions of labour in the home could also have a positive impact on underpensioned outcomes. But these changes take a lot of time to take effect and to see the results, and it's part of kind of, a holistic push across policy areas. So we need a really joined up approach to achieve this. So I think what's most important when we're addressing this underpension challenge is that we keep that long-term and holistic perspective when we're looking for solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. And I know that we did some research together last year on the effect of shared parental leave. And actually, if dads were to take a similar amount of time off of work as a mum, so shared 6 months, so 12 months in total, that could actually reduce the gender pensions gap by 60%. So again, it's kind of non-pension specific policy ask, but it does show the impact that it could have on the gender pensions gap. And Joanne, back to you quickly. I know obviously we're in a cost of living crisis at the moment, so whilst we are lobbying the government, now might not be the time to necessarily ask that individuals are paying more, but essentially we are calling on a roadmap from the government, because obviously a lot of these proposals have been kicking around since 2017.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's exactly that. The government committed to many of these changes back in 2017. They said that they would try and implement these changes by the middle of the 2020s. I know we're only in January 2023, but we are kind of heading towards the middle of the 2020s. And in policy terms, these things take time to think about, to refine, to implement. So we really do need to start working on these issues now, so that we're in a position when we come through this cost of living crisis to be able to think about how we can implement these. Because, the longer we kick this down the road, the worse the problem's going to get. And this is one of those issues that, as I said, I've been working in pensions for many, many years, far too many years. And it's the issue that always gets kicked down the road. And if we do that, we are just simply condemning millions of people, millions of, hardworking people to pension poverty and to suboptimal outcomes. So, we have to tackle this issue. We have to tackle it once and for all. And that's why, Mark said there's an awful lot of consensus across the industry, across, carers groups, employer groups, coming together. So we have to work together with government to develop that roadmap, so that when we're through this cost of living crisis, we have a clear way forward on this issue, and we can address this issue once and for all.
Absolutely. And Mark, just quickly on policy asks from a PLSA perspective, is there anything additional you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, that's right. We, as the body that represents the whole of the workplace pension sector, we absolutely agree with the proposals mentioned by Lauren and Joanne during the course of this panel discussion. But in addition to that, we've shown, it's not controversial to say that there's not enough money going into pension savings. Thanks to Lauren and her colleagues at the Pensions Policy Institute, some research that we did found that 50% of savers are currently on track without any reforms to fail to meet their retirement replacement rate, income rate that the Pensions Commission identified in 2005. So in addition to the measures for the underpensioned groups, clearly that's going to be far more acute for underpensioned groups. But in addition to those measures, there aren't actually any national objectives set for the pension savings sector by government. So we're calling on the government to set objectives that are adequate, affordable, and fair. And in that sort of adequate and fair element, we think the state pension is too low. It's too low by OECD standards. We support the triple lock. The triple lock will mean that the pension, state pension, gradually increases by more than inflation. But we think once it reaches the minimum retirement living standard, which of course itself will be rising as well, we think that the state pension should actually be pegged to that limit, which is the limit by which, sort of a poverty threshold under which we think no retiree should fall. And we also want to see minimum contributions increased on automatic enrolment, recognizing that we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We're not asking people to put their hands in their pockets and contribute more to their pensions now. Our proposals suggest that these are increased gradually over the course of the rest of this decade and into the next one. And the contribution increases will begin with employers, so that employees don't see changes to their take-home pay. And eventually, over the course of many years, we want this to get to a total contribution of 12%, up from the 8% now, with half coming from the employer and half coming from the employee. We've already mentioned the proposals for the underpensioned groups. The PLSA is in complete agreement about the lower earnings limit, starting from the first pound of earnings and lowering the age limit at which AE kicks in. But we also think the industry can be doing more here as well to, at the very small end, just to improve the communications it gives to the workforce and to its members about what support is available and what sort of levels they need to be contributing to their pension. But elsewhere, 8% automatic enrollment contributions is the minimum, but there's no, pension schemes employers don't have to put the minimum in. They are allowed to put in more. So we were doing plenty of work to encourage employers where they can and where they want to offer it to employees, perhaps as an extra incentive for people to apply for jobs at their companies, and they can actually offer more. So there are other things we can do, things like parental leave as well. Some employers offer pension contributions whilst their employees are on parental leave at no extra cost. So there are other measures out there, but we think if these reforms are implemented, then it could make the difference of nearly £4,000 to the retirement income of people. That's in today's money. So that's an increase of about 25% for people at the lower end of the earnings level. So incredibly, some big numbers there, and hopefully some relatively straightforward changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I've just seen there's quite a few questions within our chat, so I would like to try and rattle through some of these. And Lauren, I'm going to start with you. So in terms of the ethnic groups which are classed as underpensioned, could you list which groups are the worst off?
Yeah, so this is quite a challenging one to do because we're quite restricted by the data that's available, and unfortunately a lot of the data sets are nationally available and collected on a big enough scale to be representative, don't include a breakdown by ethnic groups, or don't include enough from individual ethnic groups to be kind of representative in that sense. So for like labour statistics, like employment rates and income, we've got a detailed breakdown, and in those areas, people from Pakistani and Bangladeshi backgrounds are the worst off. But when it comes to pension wealth and current pension incomes, we're very restricted on that because we don't have that breakdown available in the stats. So it's quite frustrating as a researcher because we recognise that there are quite substantial differences between these groups, and for policy to be effective and meet the needs of individual groups to support better later life outcomes, really we need that data available. It's something that we've been looking into a lot at the Pensions Policy Institute. We released a briefing note last summer that was looking particularly at this issue of data availability in relation to ethnic minorities. But at the moment, it seems like it's just not really on the agenda to increase that representation in the surveys that are available.
Thank you, Lauren. Another quick question, and Stefan, I'm going to direct this at you. So Chris Jeffrey, who we know very well, he has done a lot of work in campaigning around paid carers leave, and reliably informs that there are 9.5 million families that are juggling working with care responsibilities. Obviously, you are Swedish. So the Swedish kind of childcare system is set up in a way in which it is free. So do you have less of a pension adequacy problem in Sweden because essentially you have a full working population of parents?
What the free or very subsidized childcare has done is that the birth rates are reasonably high in Sweden compared to other places. And that's really important because Chris points out that in 20 years' time, we will have more people over the age of 50 than under 25. So we see an aging society, and the only way to deal with that is either immigration or increase the birth rate. So I think this is something the society need to do in order to stay relevant going forward. But what can you do? I think a lot of people are carers as well, and particularly you are not just children, it can also be an older parent. And if you don't have a good support for elderly people who cannot stay at home, that the family has to do all the work, you're also going to have pull people out of the labor market in order to take care of your parents. So I think there is also a lot of work to be done. And I know in Canada, they think this is the big ticking bomb when it comes to retirement, that today elderly care, taking care of older family members, a lot of people are doing that. But since the families are getting smaller, fewer children on the old people, it's going to be a struggle going forward. And I think this is something you cannot just look at it in isolation. I think every Western society have to think about how we're going to tackle the problem of an aging population. And pension is part of it, but also healthcare and caring for older people in the society. And we need to find a way for it. And I think there you really need to look across all the part of the social security system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Joanne, I know you've obviously spoken about this in terms of childcare, but also kind of paid carers leave and, you know, other levers that we could pull to essentially support people who do actually want to continue working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we need to be creative, we need to be flexible, and we need to adapt the benefit system and the support systems to the current labour market, but also the current sort of longevity profile of society. So, you know, Chris makes a point about carers. Stefan, you talked about people caring for children or caring for older people. Lots of people are caring for people at both ends of that spectrum, and very often they're women. So it's really thinking about how we can be flexible, how we can just think innovatively about doing some of these things. And, you know, clearly dealing with social care and elder care is a big political issue. Again, sort of thinking about this in terms of my own family circumstances, it kind of makes the childcare issue look quite cheap by comparison. So, you know, that is an issue that needs to be looked at. It is hugely politically controversial, hugely politically expensive, and that's why governments, again, you know, over recent years have sort of lots of stripes have kicked that down the road. But again, it's an issue that needs to be looked at, because again, it helps, as Chris has said, get people back into the labour market if there's that support, if there's that social infrastructure that we can put around people to help people into the labour market and help people themselves when they get to be older.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, you know, we are in a aging population within the UK, so it is something that we can kick it down the road, but it's only ever going to get worse. But whilst I've got you, Joanne, I just wanted to ask, in terms of, we've spoken about obviously the government, we're in a cost of living crisis, we're not expecting individuals to necessarily put their hands in their pockets to increase their pension provision, but is there anything that employers could be doing to support their workforce at the moment in terms of, I guess, pension knowledge and education?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we recognise that lots of employers are also, you know, facing the squeeze at the moment, just in terms of cost of living. You know, employment costs have gone up, or the costs of running businesses rather have gone up. So we recognise that as well. But, you know, there is lots that employers can do in terms of just pointing people towards the Money and Pension Service, pointing people towards a money helper, just really making sure that people can be as informed, you know, their employees can be as informed as possible about the need to save and to keep saving. You know, so I think there's lots that employers can do there. And of course, you know, there's lots of resources about, now Pensions provides those resources, PLSA have got those sort of resources available. So to really sort of help employers help their employees.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, financial well-being is something that we hear a lot about at the moment. And I know, Stefan, you've been kind of looking around at kind of different financial well-being within the kind of DC space. But, you know, is there anything that we could be doing to support individuals at the moment? So is it just a case of signposting, you know, the free resources, Money and Pension Service, or do you think there needs to be a stronger industry effort to kind of raise awareness of some of these inequalities?
Well, Sam, if I can answer that question, I would say if you're in a tough position and you don't have any money, it's not much you can do. You need to kind of get by. And what you might be helpful from is if you can get some ideas at least, so you have the knowledge. For example, taking a credit card debt is very expensive. Trying to avoid it, are there other ways you can find a way through? So just having the basic knowledge and talk about it. And I think we talked about stigma before. This is an even bigger stigma. You don't want to tell people that you can afford it, and therefore, like pension wise and other parts, I think it's really important that people shouldn't hesitate to contact them, because they're there to help. And you're not the only one who's in a tough position. Other people are. So don't be ashamed of it. It's not your fault. It's the society ended up in a situation where we have runaway energy prices, and it's something you could not have foreseen. So trying to talk to someone, trying to discuss it, because if you keep it inside and doesn't look for information, it's not going to help you. So I think the best you can do is arm yourself with some knowledge, and don't be afraid to talk about it, and see what other people are doing, because there's a lot of good ideas you might find from your friends and family and other people.
Yeah, and I think there was research earlier this week that was showing the amount of stress and worry and anxiety that debt is having on people, and actually the loss of income because they're potentially off sick or unable to work within their job. So yeah, it's obviously, it can be crippling for some people. But I guess back to the stigma point we made earlier around state benefit system, it's kind of signposting to individuals to show them where they can go for debt help and advice, and trying to remove any stigma, because I think everyone's feeling the pinch at the moment. So it's not necessarily something that they should feel ashamed of, but that's my opinion. Mark, I haven't come to you yet. Sorry, just last one. In terms of employers, from a PLSA perspective, is there something that you guys are pushing for employers to?
Yeah, not necessarily PLSA perspective, but we are aware of some employers who have made cost of living bonuses to their employees, just as a one-off payment to sort of recognise that bills are increasing. On the DB, defined benefit pension side as well, then these schemes can make discretionary payments to members who are already receiving their benefits if their funding positions allow. And not necessarily PLSA position, but personal opinion is, if you work in the private sector especially, ask your boss for a pay rise. You should be a big advocate for your own circumstances there. Don't wait to be offered one. Times are hard, and go and make the most of the resources that you've got yourself. It's not always possible for everybody, and there's no harm in asking.
Thank you, Mark. We're getting loads and loads of questions, but conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left. If I can just go back to everybody very quickly just before we wrap. If we look holistically at the underpension problem, is it something that should sit with the members themselves to solve? Is it government or is it employers? So whose responsibility is the underpensioned issue? And I'm not going to start with you, Joanne. I'm going to let you have your voice. I'm going to start with Lauren.
So I think it's a combination of all three, but what's really important is that we recognise that for the underpensioned members, or those who aren't even pension savings, so they're not technically members, that they might not be able to make the changes that would be needed to achieve better later life outcomes. So they will need support from employers and from government to be able to improve those circumstances, particularly in these challenging economic times. We can't be expecting them to increase pension saving when actually there are much more pressing needs on their incomes.
Thank you, Lauren. Stefan.
Well, I think Lauren had a very good point there, and it's difficult if you don't have the money. You can't make magic with it, right? So you have to do the best with what you've got. And I think when it comes to the underpension, the one who really can make a difference there is the government, by having proper reform to support those who are in the most need. You could argue that middle income earners, they're also going to have a challenge, but they have the ability to deal with it sort of through the pensions and thinking about contributing more. So there you can add more responsibility on the individual. But when it comes to the underpension, I think the big responsibility is for the government.
Thank you, Stefan. Mark?
Yeah, clearly it's all three. It does seem unfair to keep hitting government with sticks and ask them to sort our problems out. But at the same time, the automatic enrolment review was completed in 2017. There are recommendations in there that would make a difference to underpensioned groups, and it really is quite hard to, from my perspective, for a lobby group to know that report is on a shelf covered in dust, with the impetus to implement those reforms just simply not there at the moment, as the government faces all kinds of other problems with it's not easy when the NHS is obviously a priority at the moment. Striking workers are a priority at the moment, but if we let these problems store up for the future, then as we say, with the problem of aging populations and stagnant real wages and all the rest of it, then we're storing up problems for society. And it'd just be one thing that this or a future government would be able to implement quite quickly, where we think there's already recognition that something needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And finally, Joanne.
Well, thanks. You've come to me last, so I don't have a huge amount to say other than say I agree with everybody else. Just being last, but I think yes, clearly, everyone has responsibility in all of this. Everyone can do what they can, but I think an awful lot of this does come back to government making those big policy changes. There's just unlock the sort of barriers, the doors that are there, that are shut firm in people's faces at the moment. Unlock those doors to allow people through to be able to start saving and start making a difference to their retirement futures. Because as Stefan said, as Lauren said, for a lot of people, frankly, at the moment, those things are out of their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I just want to thank all of our attendees who have been frantically typing questions and comments, especially Johnny and Chris on the chat function, who we know very well, so we will continue the chat offline, no doubt. But I'm just left to say thank you very, very much to our amazing panel today. So Joanne Segars, Stefan Lundberg, Lauren Wilkinson and Mark Smith. And we hope you've enjoyed this session. We will be sharing this as a video recording out later this week. And any more questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We will be sending a feedback survey. And thank you very much for your time today. And I hope everybody has a lovely afternoon.